Okay, I've got 5 after 6. So, and there are, just for your information, 41 people so far on this call. And I want to first thank Rae so much for agreeing to do this for us. And I'd like to offer a prayer, and then I'm just going to turn it over to her. She has a document also that she may want me to put on the screen, and I can do that if need be once we get started. But let's start with a word of prayer. God, you are the God of every moment of our lives, and you are the God that is there with us during the wonderful times when we are having wonderful times, and you are also the God who is there for us during the difficult times and the challenging times and the confusing times. And in so many ways, these times are those for us. I am very thankful for Rae, for her expertise, for her willingness to share with us this evening. And I ask you to guide her. I ask you to give each of us church members wisdom to know how we can best be the church now and how we can be the church in the future. And I pray these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, Miss Rae, if you will, go right ahead.
Okay. Wow, this is really exciting. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes tonight to learn some more about that. Bill and I have been talking a lot about COVID, actually almost non-stop for the last month. And I know that we've been doing worship via FaceTime Live and website, and I know how much I miss all of our church members, and I'm sure that you all miss the personal interaction with your members. And this is a very strange and kind of scary time that we're in. So I'm gonna, the first thing before I start kind of going into some considerations and some safety precautions, I'm gonna just say that a lot of things that have been traditional have been sort of upended by COVID. It's a very unique, and I've been working around the edges of healthcare for 25 years now, and it's really truly unprecedented. So it presents some unusual challenges for us, and I think a couple particular challenges for the church, since we tend to have some of our older members are some of our most faithful members, and some of the people that we minister to with health issues are most at risk. And so it does present some interesting challenges. I wish I could give you tonight some really hard and fast guidelines, but the situation in terms of guidance from the state and guidance from county government is literally changing, and a couple things changed as recently as an email I got 30 minutes ago. So the situation in terms of numbers of people allowed in gatherings and all of that kind of thing is extremely fluid. And I'll work with y'all to send out some email updates as more information is available. So the first thing is just to know, and I'm sure you all know, that COVID's highly contagious, and infected people can share the virus even if they never have a symptom themselves. And that is one of the things that's really most troubling about it. The most reliable testing can indicate that a person doesn't have the virus at the moment they're tested, but it's not known if those who've had the virus in the past actually develop any immunity. And so you could get a test today that says you don't have the COVID virus, and tomorrow you could be exposed to somebody, and within 2 to 14 days, you could start to have symptoms. So it's a very, it really is a very invisible issue. Members of households who have vulnerable residents need to be aware that when you do go back to work or you go into an environment where social distancing isn't possible, you can carry the virus back home. And there's still research out on whether or not we always jokingly talked about anytime our kids changed a new school that they were little disease vectors, and we'd be sick for the next 3 months because of all the stuff they brought home. And so there's the science is still out a little bit about, well, we think children can indeed transmit it, but that may even be changing a little bit. So the symptoms with COVID, initially, the doctors and scientists were saying there was a fever and a cough and shortness of breath. But as more and more cases have been hospitalized and more research has been done, now chills, muscle pain, having shaking with chills that just won't stop, headaches, sore throat, and really interestingly, a loss of taste or smell that's sudden can all be signs of COVID. Certain people are more vulnerable to having a more serious impact from COVID, and that includes elderly individuals. And I am deeply offended. They define that as people who are 65 or older. You know, what can I say? And, but also people who have any serious or underlying health conditions like high blood pressure, chronic lung disease, diabetes, asthma might not be as much as an indicator, obesity. And if you have a system that's immune compromised, so if you're undergoing chemotherapy or some other kind of, or if you have any of the many diseases that can affect your immune system, those all put you at more risk. The most important thing throughout this entire path forward is that social distancing, which means not getting within more than closer than 6 feet to people, and when you're in public now wearing a mask, is going to continue to be important, and it's going to probably be important for a long time. And if you're in your household, you can sit in church when we can eventually go back to church with the person you're living with, but you need to be 6 feet away from everybody else. And I don't know about you, but I'm a hugger, and that is just, it's horrible. It's just horrible, but it's the only way to really prevent transmission of the virus. And the virus has and is killing a lot of people. Some people say that it's, you know, the more people die from the flu, and that's true. But COVID is much, 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 much more contagious than the flu. And people tend to get sick and go much more quickly. And there's no treatment. There is treatment for most of the conditions affecting the flu. COVID is so new that they're still figuring out how even to treat it. And a lot of people were put on ventilators initially, and now they're suggesting that, well, maybe that's not the best thing because it puts so much pressure on the lungs. So all of medical science is kind of being upended right now as we try to figure out more about this. Right now, gatherings of more than 10 people are not recommended. I suspect that over time, the size of a social gathering will increase. But right now, gatherings of more than 10 are not recommended. Now, that said, apparently, in a few days, restaurants are going to start open, and there are guidelines that are being established for them that says initially they can't have more than 50% of their normal, what the fire marshal says their guest limit is, but they're supposed to follow social distancing requirements, have tables 6 feet apart, and a lot of other protective measures. So as we eventually get to think about coming back and seeing one another in person, it's going to be really important to figure out how to do social distancing in a church. I think we'll probably literally want to take painter's tape or those little sticky dots that will come off of our lovely pews and mark out intervals. And so a couple that lives together could sit together, but their son and daughter-in-law who don't live with them need to be 6 feet away. And that'll probably mean alternating rows within the church, within the sanctuary, and marking off those and really urging people to do that. And I don't know about you, but I've never seen anything that upsets things quite as much as asking somebody to sit in a different seat. But at the same time, we don't want to share this thing if we are unfortunate enough to have it. So some things like that are going to be really important. There are some basic rules that people should follow. So when people go back to work, or eventually when people are able to go to church, everybody should be taking your temperature before you leave the house in the morning. You should automatically take your temperature every single day now and monitor to see what your normal temperature is, so you can track if it suddenly starts to get higher on a consistent basis. The CDC says a fever of 100.4, not 104, but 100.4 or above is a sign of concern. But I've had doctors tell me that if you see a sudden spike in your normal temperature, a couple degrees, you should pay really close attention to that. And if you have any of those symptoms or you have a spike in your temperature, you should stay home. And that means not go to work, not go to church, not go to the store, not go anyplace else. Another thing that's going to be really important, this virus is really interesting because, for instance, it can stay on cardboard for up to 24 hours. So at my office, I've been working from home because I have hit the 65 magic mark. But in my office, we have a box in the entryway for the mailman to put the mail. And then we take the box and set it aside, and we don't open it for 24 hours. So we rotate boxes so that we're not opening the mail. It could stay on hard surfaces if it's undisturbed for longer than that. So the CDC recommends that any surfaces that are in common areas that people are touching be cleaned every 2 hours. So that means all the doorknobs wiped down with disinfectant, all the pews be wiped down. So for instance, if eventually you were going to have 2 services a day, because this virus can remain on hard surfaces between the morning service and the afternoon service or evening service, you need to wipe down all the hard surfaces where in common areas. So I think that's a really challenge for places that probably most of us only have a cleaning service once a week. You need to reconsider having choir practice. And that breaks my heart because I love music, and choir is one of my most favorite things that we do. But there is a church that actually almost everybody in their choir got COVID, and at least 2 people died, because when you sing, you're projecting. And so if you have the virus, it can travel even further than 6 feet. And if you're sitting next to somebody singing, and if you're exchanging hymnals and books and helping each other with music, as those of us in choir tend to do, you could be at risk. So for a while, until we know some more about this, it is a bad idea to have choir practice and to have the choir sing. If you have a soloist sing, you would even need to just have some wipes and quickly wipe the surface if people are changing position. And we'd have to socially distance and measure and see if where people usually stand to sing is, I don't think it's 6 feet away from where the piano is located at our church, because I also play the piano. If you have children's programs, the CDC, which is cdc.gov, has several pages of guidelines. If you have a child care facility, they have rather scary child care guidelines for child cares that are still open right now during COVID. And child care is really important because a lot of first responders and doctors and medical folks and first responders are having to work. And so child care is a really critical issue, but there are a lot of guidelines there. So if you have child care in your church, I would review those guidelines. It probably means that anything a child's likely to slobber on, you need to put it away if it can't be cleaned and sterilized. But I would look at those guidelines really closely. The CDC also has a guidance that's called the Guidance for Community and Faith Organizations. And it's a couple pages, and it's got some interesting information. It suggests that you put up signs. They could be temporary signs reminding people to wash their hands, reminding people to wear their masks, cloth masks, The CDC recommends that you use cloth masks and not the N95 masks that are used for medical, because those are still very much needed for healthcare workers. And it requires, if you have staff and volunteers, to remind them they need to stay home if they have any symptoms. You've got to clean and disinfect everything. And so those are the basic guidelines. I think that initially the state was moving toward having churches kind of fall in the category of what they called social gatherings, or large group gatherings. So initially there were going to be recommendations. Right now, no more than 10 people are supposed to clump in a social gathering. There have been discussions about moving that to 50 people. But now they're having further discussions, because if you've got, we once went to a church that seated 3,000 people. Well, if a church has 3,000 seats, theoretically they could mark the seats to probably seat 1,000 people, maybe. So now they're trying to figure out what to work with the numbers, because in Tennessee there are vast differences in congregation size. I don't think we have any 1,000-member Cumberland congregations, unfortunately, because it is the best denomination. But so those numbers are going to be moving a little bit. I think that I think those are the main points. And I guess the biggest thing is that, we have a fair number of older folks, and I'm one of them, so I hope nobody smacks me for saying that, in our congregation. And we've got a number of people who've got ongoing health concerns that make them vulnerable. And I suspect that a lot of our congregations, the church is the place we turn most of all in our hour of need. But this is a really, really serious situation. And there are guidelines, there are ways. I think that in in a couple weeks, a few weeks, a month, 6 weeks, we should be able to start to congregate. But it's going to be really, really important that we try to follow all of the rules and guidelines about this thing. And I think it's going to take an openness and a servant's heart, and our Christian compassion and concern for all of our brethren and sisters to be able to move forward. A lot of meetings, and I think this should be a telling thing. A lot of the American Medical Association, I usually go to their meetings in Chicago every June. The American Medical Association has canceled their big meeting, which is their policy-making meeting. The Tennessee Medical Association, doctor organization, I always go to their meetings. Their meetings have been canceled at least into July. And I just think it is a very unwise idea for us to congregate in groups of 100 or 200 in places that it might be difficult to maintain all the social distancing. And I hate it. I really hate it. But out of prudence and concern for everybody's safety, I feel like that's sort of where we are. Another guideline that they're looking at is if you have 1,000 square feet, this relates kind of to offices, and they're saying you need at least 1,000 square feet per 5 employees, and that you need to space out scheduling for employees if you don't have at least 1,000 feet. I'm having to reconfigure some of the offices in my building at the Medical Society. We're having to move cubicles because some of those are closer than 6 feet together. So we're in the process of doing that. So I know that's a whole lot of information. We have a fact sheet we can send out to you. Do people have questions? Somebody gave me the question, do you have a recommendation when we should begin services? I would say, first of all, we need to wait a few days. By the end of the week, I think the governor's going to have more detailed recommendations, probably directly relating to the faith community. They've been telling folks to cancel like concerts and big gatherings. Excuse me just a minute. I don't know why I did with my drink. There it is. He may have some specific guidelines toward by the end of the week on the specific size of gatherings. I suspect that with the phased approach that I believe Friday they were definitely take this phased approach. That first you could have 10 people in a gathering, and then in 2 weeks you might be able to have 50 people in a gathering if you can maintain social distancing. And then possibly in 2 weeks after that, you could have 100 people in a gathering if you can maintain social distancing. Several things that are going to happen. The first thing is infections are going to increase as people start going out and about work. When people start going back to work and people start going to restaurants, we will see an increase. And they have some metrics that if deaths or infections start to increase too quickly, then they'll stay longer in a stage that has these number of people who can be gathered. So I would say I wouldn't begin services until you feel that you've educated the congregation to really understand how important it is to, and again, I'm a hugger. I am a hugger. I pretty much make it through the whole congregation in 2.5 hours on a Sunday morning. And it's kind of a high point of my week. Not that Bill's not a great hugger himself, but it really is a high point of the week. But you've got to feel confident that people are able to help themselves and hold back a little bit, and that they'll wear masks, and that you have the means to be able to sanitize the surfaces within the facility, and things like taking up the offering. I absolutely would not pass an offering plate. And I was a Baptist before I was a Cumberland Presbyterian, so I know that is just does not go well. But you might want to have an offering plate at the front and the back of church so people can put their offering in. But everybody's going to touch an offering plate that's passed, and I absolutely wouldn't do that. So partly it requires looking at how you do your services, what kind of contact, communion. You could potentially do communion if you were able to, instead of passing the bread and the cups, if you could have them on a table that are set up with somebody who's had been gloved and had their hands cleaned, and that people come forward and take the elements, staying 6 feet apart. But that maintaining social distancing is really the hardest thing and the most important thing to protect our loved ones within the church. So Bill just said money counters need gloves. We need to try to be on the lookout for the little disposable gloves so that the money counters can wear those when they are writing checks, counting the checks.
Rae?
Yeah.
This is Jim Buttram.
Hi, Jim.
How are you?
I became a Cumberland at your church.
You sure did.
Yeah.
Listen, couple of things. One, we're thinking about having like a drive-in service.
Uh-huh.
So do you have any pointers or anything that we need to really watch when we do that?
If people stay in their cars, if people actually stay in their cars and don't, start hugging on each other through the window, you could do that.
So we don't need people out roaming outside the cars or
You don't need
anything
people
like
outside roaming out. You don't need somebody going to take in the collection.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Unless they hold I guess you can't do that within 6 feet. So we're sending out a weekly, letter from Bill to our church and letting people mail their checks in, their contributions and tithes and gifts and offering.
Right.
But the big thing is you got to stay 6 feet away from each other. Right now there are restrictions on the number of people who can be in, and as I said, until about 4 hours ago, we had more detailed exactly about when the numbers were going to change. And that's all been put on hold in the last few hours. People can also, you can do online giving. There are different ways that you can set that up that aren't very difficult and are secure. If people have computers, but not everybody has a computer. Most people have a smartphone now, though.
Let me ask you another question. Okay. If you, knowing all the things that we need to do and things that need to happen, and what would you say is too aggressive a schedule to try to start having face-to-face services?
Well, and I would say that depends on a couple of things. First of all, I would wait at least 2 weeks to have face-to-face services. And the reason is, over last week and this weekend, a whole bunch of testing has been done. Yesterday in Hamilton County, there were like 760 people who went through the drive-through testing. And so as those test results from these 2 weekends of testing, and it's been done in a lot of our surrounding counties, that's going to give us a little bit, some more actual data. One of the real problems about this is that testing is so slow to start up, and there are a lot of complicated reasons why. There haven't been enough testing supplies. They've had testing machines, but they didn't have the right materials to do the test in that machine, or they had the materials to do a test, but they didn't have the machine. So we're just now finally doing enough testing that we're going to get a better idea about how prevalent this is in our region. So I would wait at least 2 weeks to consider doing an in-person service. And then that would also depend on, if I had to guess, I would say it probably will be a month before gatherings of 50 or more in the category churches will fall in, probably would be permitted. And
yeah, I heard that there were a lot of churches in Texas, or CP churches in that area, who have decided that they're not going to have services till the 1st of June. So, just being safe.
Yep. And I think in many, many ways, not doing it to the 1st of June is a really safe decision. I know there are a lot of other factors, but we had so little testing for so long in our whole region. And maybe shutting everything down when we did was able, the reason that we did social distancing, and they talk about flattening the curve, the reason that we did that was not because it is going to keep people from getting sick. It kept people from, a whole bunch of people getting sick all at one time, so we didn't overwhelm the healthcare system. Because if you watch the news, you see what's happening in New York City. So we had to make these drastic steps just to not overwhelm our healthcare system, which meant that because more people would have died. I'm going to recommend that we not hold services in May at our church, and I'm just the pastor's wife, but I love them.
Good idea.
But I just don't think we should do it.
Right.
I've got 2 questions. One being about the cleaning of the church and disinfecting and everything like that after you start having services. If you have like cloth seats and stuff like that you sit on the pews, is just spraying Lysol on that, disinfect that with all the porousness and everything like that?
Actually, so 2 things. So actually, for whatever reason, the virus does not seem to last as long on cloth. So if you have a Sunday service, if you just have a Sunday morning service, and then you're not there till Wednesday night or the next Sunday, I would still wipe down all the hard surfaces, just because there were a couple of indications from another country. Oh, it was the one of the cruise ships. They found virus alive on hard surfaces 17 days after the ship was evacuated. That's the only place that's had that finding. But so I would still wipe down all the hard surfaces, but I don't think you need to worry about cloth, especially if you're not meeting multiple times in a day.
And then also, I know we have a few members of our church that haven't been able to stream it with us and things like that. They don't have access to that. Would it be feasible to kind of open it up to maybe people who can come in and sit there and actually get the service so they can get something out of it? And we kind of just open it to those people who can't do it, because that's definitely social distancing there. Because there's not many of them, but just so they can at least get in.
Yeah. That's your call, but again, maintaining the distance and I'd say that being able to maintain the distance with discipline and having the resources and the person power to be able to wipe everything down afterwards are the big limiting factor. But I understand, because we have some people who also don't have access. I thought about doing a conference call of the sermon, because people could call on their cell phones. So we might still work through that. And Zoom's kind of cool, because I got to see Jim Butter's pretty face there. You're muted, Jim. I see your lips moving.
All right. Have you seen that document that's 24 questions the church should consider before they start having services again? I think the denomination even has it out on their site to look at it. I can't remember exactly what the guy's name is, like Brady, Braddy. He's .com. He's has a model, but he works for Lifeway. But evidently, the denomination has considered that as a document that we should look at and study. And it's a very, very good document. 24 questions to really think through before you open the church back up.
And it's Brady with 2 D's?
I think it sure is, yes.
Cool. I'm going to look for that. Bill, violate the law. Bill. The state of Tennessee is moving an interesting stance, and that stance is that they trust us all to be good volunteers and do the right thing. I think the governor has more confidence in human behavior than I have. But I don't think there are going to be any penalties or punishment if you violate the law. The penalty or the punishment will be if you wipe out the older ladies class because you met. So, thoughts on summer camp? Wow. I think it's way too soon to tell about summer camps or vacation Bible school. I think it's too soon to tell. Maybe our vacation Bible school is mostly outside, but we don't do any social distancing at that. And the other thing that's an unknown factor here, I'm sorry I'm not more definitive, and I hope this is helpful. There's some indication that, that sun, if we get some really good, some good sun over time, that might have some impact. But I don't think that's something we can build our lives on at this moment. And do look, if you're thinking about children's programming, do look at the CDC guidelines. Again, it's cdc.gov, and they have several pages that relate to childcare. But if you're doing camp, a lot of the same considerations would be in place.
I had heard from the American Camp Association, this is Bess from First Chattanooga. The American Camp Association did put out something saying that the CDC was going to come out with guidelines for camps. So I'm in early May is when they were supposed to come out with that. So I'll be looking for that.
Yeah. The other thing is that, the disease is hitting different parts of the country at different times. I mean, we haven't been as hard hit as New York City has spread out, and I think that helps. But I think that's a big issue. I see the note, General Assembly. When is General Assembly supposed to be?
This is Sheila O'Mara. I'm the moderator of General Assembly. It's the first week in June, the 7th.
How many people are normally there?
About 1,000 or more. It's in Louisville, Kentucky, and of course it'll be up to Kentucky is determined how they, they do their phasing in. But what I heard you saying earlier is that social distance guidelines are going to be in effect for quite some time, right?
Yes.
So then the question becomes, if it's allowed, then how do you maintain social distancing with 1,000 people in a ballroom?
Yeah, and it may be that, and again, you're gonna, at that point, you're gonna also have to see how this is being enforced in Kentucky, and if Kentucky has any bans on large gatherings. I've been told that things like all kinds of summer music festivals are being canceled.
Right.
Because those are large gatherings. And right now, concerts that were going to be happening in the next couple of weeks at the Tivoli, which is 1,000 people or so, are all being postponed to September, October, November.
Yeah, right now there's a big volleyball tournament scheduled right after General Assembly that so far has not been canceled, but it very well could be.
Yeah. No, it's my feeling about this, and I'm on a bunch of task forces and committees, and I'm working with doctors all the time, and I've spent several hours every week the last 6 weeks in conference calls with medical professionals, and I just think that utmost caution is really needed. There's so much we don't know about it. And the thing is different. Mostly we're going to be under the guidance of what the governor wants. And I don't think he's going nearly far enough, honestly. I think he's being incautious with people's health. I just do. I'm very frustrated with the way we're handling it. So I think more caution is better than less caution in this situation. And I'm not an alarmist at all, by nature. Any other questions? Well, I'll be glad to send whoever needs to get it an update as I get some more information. A couple of us just had a call the other night talking about, gee, when was it safe to come out for church? And Courtney suggested we might want to do this Zoom thing. So I'm so excited to get to meet so many fellow Cumberlands.
Well, and I know I speak for everybody else when I say thank you so much for your time tonight. And I will provide, I have the document that you already provided for tonight. I'll get that to Chris. I'm recording this, and so I will put it on our church's YouTube channel, and I will get that link to Chris so that anybody that wants somebody else to take a look at this tonight can do that. And I guess we'll just kind of go from there.
Great. Well, God bless you for everything you do and for all the creative ways you're trying to lead your flocks. This is really unprecedented, and I hope not something we ever have to experience again. But God bless you for your leadership.
You as well. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody that participated tonight. I'm going to end the meeting now.